So have you all ever jumped waves at the ocean? And I realize that we are in the land of 10,000 lakes, which are a delightful body of water. Yet this morning we need ocean. So I want you to imagine with me standing on the seashore of your favorite ocean, West Coast, East Coast, whichever ocean it might be. I'm at Laguna Beach right now before it was a successful reality TV show. It's about 80 degrees out and it is gorgeous. We've just come and touched that sand. It's gritty in our toes. And now we've gotten closer to the waves and they are starting to lap up on our feet. They've come to greet us. They've come to kiss our toes and say, I am so glad to see you. We've now ventured a little further in. Our bodies have gotten acclimated to that warmth. Our ankles, our shins, and we're noticing and we're paying attention to the undertow because that is wicked and strong and dangerous. So we're mindful of that while we're allowing our body to sink more deeply into the rhythm of these waves that come and greet us and draw us a little further out. So now we're about waist high. And we're noticing when the waves come that we try to bounce up a little bit over them, and we feel like we're being rocked in those waves. We're feeling as if we are being held by this loving universe. And then all of a sudden the 7th or 8th wave comes and we turn just in time to see it and it pummels us. And I know that's a scientific fact, right? That 7th or 8th waves, you'll have counted waves. That's pummeled us and it's dragged us, it's pushed us to the shore, and we cannot tell which end is up, and there is sand everywhere. We take a moment to regroup, and then we're back out in the waves being held by that glorious, warm water. This time, however, we've started counting the waves, and we notice that 7th or 8th wave that comes, and instead of being pummeled by it, we pause, we turn and face it, and we dive into its center. And in the center of this wave, we know on top of it there's chaos, but in the center there is stillness and this fluid motion amongst the swirling nature of the wave. And then we pop back out on the other side of that wave that tried to pummel us. We learn that with rhythm, that when that big wave comes, instead of trying to jump over it, because usually it'll nail us in the face and drag us back to the shore and it'll flatten us. We've learned instead the wisdom of turning towards that turbulent chaos and diving straight into the middle of the wave where there is stillness. And there's a slowing down, and there's a quiet center in the chaos. It's what Elijah the prophet was looking for. He needed some quiet. It's why he fled. See, he had dissented. He had challenged the oppressive power structures that kept bodies bound in economic bondage, that kept them in death-dealing places. He dissented and he would not follow Queen Jezebel and King Ahab's god Baal, who was the storm god. He raised his courage and he raised his voice to follow his God who commanded that the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the neighbor, that their needs needed to be seen and attended to. That he spoke out against budgets, which are really moral documents about who's favored and who is not. He spoke out in such a way that he wanted to lift them up rather than to have another heel against their back. He spoke out against King Ahab and Queen Jezebel's demand for nationalistic, unquestioning loyalty. He would not buy into their religious practices. They ruled with greed and violence. And let's paint Elijah in a realistic light. He was a man still within his context, his historical context. And just a few chapters earlier in 1 Kings, he participated with Queen Jezebel in a "my God is bigger and better and more powerful than your God." He wanted to make sure that everyone knew that his Lord was superior over Baal, and it accumulated in this horrible slaughter and all the prophets of Baal. One of the pieces in the way that I've been encountering Scripture, and have you all picked up Rob Bell's new book about the Bible? I'll just have my geeky moment about good writers then on my own, but actually not on my own. I want to share it with you. Rob Bell lifts up the possibility that one of the reasons why there's so much violence in the Bible is to lift up how absurd it is. To look at that violence and say, my goodness, when are we ever going to learn? Just the horror of it, to say one more time, that is wrong, and we need to turn to a different way. So Queen Jezebel is not pleased with Elijah. So she swears that she's going to go after him and get revenge and threatens to take his life. So Elijah's on the run. He wants to get away from Queen Jezebel. He has a panic attack. He goes through the southern kingdom of Judah, then into the wilderness where he is just despairingly asking God to let him die. Of course, he doesn't want Queen Jezebel to do it, but with God it would be okay. He's thirsty. He's hungry. He's attended to by these angels 40 days and 40 nights. He gathers his attention. He gets his energy back. And then he finds himself on a mountain. As we learned last week with the Transfiguration in ancient Jewish cosmology, a mountain is where heaven and earth, God and humanity meet. Something significant is about to take place. So he's on a mountain. It's called Mount Sinai. It's where Moses received the 10 Commandments. The author of 1 Kings is trying to grab our attention to say this person's important. It's in the lineage of Moses. So here's Elijah. Elijah is distraught. He's exhausted. Anybody with me? He's filled with fear. He's wondering if any of his justice-seeking actions matter. He wonders if it matters if he should continue standing with those in need, the vulnerable, the oppressed, those discarded by power who are just using bodies for economic gain. So he's in his cave on this mountain. Elijah envisions a world where widows and orphans and children and strangers were protected against the cruel demands of a market economy gone wild. As we journey together in this Lenten season, you are invited to attend to your caves, those safe, sacred spaces that you seek out when you too are filled with fear, when you are anxious, when you don't know if all of this even matters. This Lent, we will be returning to those places, the caves, whether that's within us or it's an actual physical space where you can hear that still, small voice of God amidst the turbulent chaos. It's how the wave comes at us of life, the waves of life, and we dive into the middle to find that still, small center. This is the opportunity for you to use, like on a Blu-ray DVD. Anybody have a Blu-ray DVD? Stay with me, y'all. Yes? No? A Blu-ray DVD. Is it this way on Netflix too? You can click the change the ending of the movie that you've just watched. Blu-ray DVD. I'm coming back. Are DVDs even still a thing? Am I showing my age? No? Are we gone past that now? What's that? VHS. Well, thank you. So on some DVDs, there's nothing like use an example, it just falls flat, right? What is she talking about? DVDs, sometimes you can watch a movie and then at the end, the director's cut, the extras, the bonus material, oh, thank you, some nods. You can click and say, oh, I want to see how they thought maybe there was another opportunity for this to end, right? So we're going to do that today with the sermon. So there are two possibilities, the ways that we can engage Elijah in his cave. The first is, there was wind, an earthquake, and fire. Those are just distractions. God was not in any of them. We hear instead, the New Revised Century Version tells us there was a sound of sheer silence. There was a whisper. After the fire, there was sound. There was thin. There was quiet. That's one way to look at this. That these symbols of earthquake and fire and wind are telling us, according to the author of 1 Kings, that we're moving away from the way God used to appear. God used to appear in those things, and yet we're trying to learn from Elijah that now God is showing up in a still, small voice, in the silence, diving into the wave in that quiet center place, which we all need. Those opportunities away from the chaos and the crazy that comes at us, to find that stillness, to be able to hear God's voice in the way that's unique and particular to each of us. Elijah hears in that silence. He meets God and hears that he is not alone, that there are many people struggling too, and they will be with Elijah. And then Elijah hears you can't just hang out here. Can't just be here for too long. It's time for you to go out and return. It's time for you to do the good work that's going to help with Israel's salvation. So here's the second possibility. And hopefully we're a both and people this morning. Yes, God shows up in that still small voice. I hope it's okay with you if I speak against the text a little bit this morning. I actually think that God does show up in the wind. When it feels as if we're being blown about, that there's chaos, that there's this fake news flying around, that there's this useless rhetoric about thoughts and prayers that just stop with thoughts and prayers, that miss the mark of going to that next step of our thoughts and prayers being transferred into action and policy change when it comes to gun control. Sometimes in our lives we feel like we are being blown about, that the wind has come in the different directions and we're overwhelmed and we're dropping too many different pieces because we're juggling too much. God is speaking to us through that wind, pointing to that necessity of shifting, of letting go, of possibly entering into our cave, of waiting and being present to our God. God is present in the earthquake that's happening now. We are experiencing these major wrestling with these tectonic shifts in our dismantling, a crumbling of safety nets for those in need. And many of us find ourselves dizzy and exhausted with trying to stand up and find that center of what we can stand on. And in that earthquake, God is saying to us, stand on my solid ground. Ground yourself, deepen yourself, because I am speaking to you through that as well. And many of us know about being burned in fires. Many of us know what it feels like to be burned by those that we trusted through betrayal and desertion. And God is showing up in those places as well, offering us balms of ointment to heal those places that have been burned. On Ash Wednesday, and I'll wrap it up, you all. On Ash Wednesday, we started our journey of people coming forward to be marked by ashes. From the dust that we will have come from, and to dust we will return, and yet every day in between we will live as God's beloved people. In the midst of the wind and the earthquake and the fire, our Lenten journey of one is turning to face those waves and diving straight into its center. It's finding the quiet stillness of God, a listening carefully to God's voice while we connect with others. And Jan Richardson tells us this: life will continually lay us bare. Life will continually lay us bare, sometimes with astonishing severity. In the midst of this, she tells us the season of Lent invites us to see what is most elemental in us, what endures, the love that creates and animates, the love that cannot be destroyed, the love that is most basic to who we are. The season inspires us to ask where this love will lead us, what it will create in and through us, what God will do in it, both our brokenness and our joy. So may we be a people who make this so. Amen.